All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, as we reported here yesterday, congressional candidate Alex Morse is facing allegations of improper conduct by several groups of college Dems. Well, I guess that's what he stands accused of because, frankly, the allegations are rather vague and also because it is far from clear that any reasonable person would call them improper. So here's the background. Morse is a high-profile Justice Dem battling Democratic incumbent Richie Neal. Neal is the powerful chair of the House Ways and Means Committee who is adamantly opposed to progressive causes and adamantly aligned with corporate interest. Longtime viewers will recall Sagar's incredible radar trashing Neal for holding a birthday party to celebrate AIG's pillaging of the public purse. Now, after watching progressives like Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush notch big upset wins against entrenched incumbents, it was looking like Morse, a 31-year-old gay mayor with working-class roots, may actually have a shot here. The election is now just weeks away. But now the race has been thrown into turmoil after the College Democrats of Massachusetts alleged that Morse had conducted himself improperly. So according to the Daily Collegian, the College Dems alleged that Morse had matched with students on dating apps, added College Dems to his close friend's Instagram story, and had sexual contact with students at the schools in question. Now, the most detailed allegation comes courtesy of the Boston Globe, which reports that one student who had a sexual encounter with Morse found out afterward that Morse was a lecturer and mayor and felt uncomfortable upon learning that information. The Young Dems claimed that Morse abused his status and position, although this kind of seems like the opposite of Morse abusing his status and position for romantic ends, since this person literally didn't know Morse's status and position. For his part, Morse has absolutely denied that any of the relationships were non-consensual, apologized for making anyone uncomfortable, and clarified that he did not have sexual interactions with his own students. So guys, look, I read all this over, I took it all in, sat with it, turned it over in my head, and I cannot possibly imagine why any of this matters. What is even being alleged here? That as a young gay man, he went on dates with other young gay men? That he followed people on Instagram? That he used dating apps? Now look, perhaps there are other allegations to emerge, and of course, we should take them as they come, if they come. But are liberals really appointing themselves morality czar now, passing judgment on consensual adult bedroom activities? As Ryan Grimm put it, if Morse hooked up with a 20-year-old plumber, nobody would rightly care. But they're a student, so they have to be protected by the purity police. Ridiculous. Now, you might want to be careful with this Puritan revival high sex priest stuff, folks, or you're going to end up like this guy.
Here are some of the lyrics. You ready? Whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. Hold up. I said certified freak 7 days a week. Wet ass P-word. Make that pullout game weak. Yeah, you effin' with some wet ass P-word. P-word is female genitalia.
Telling you, you don't want to end up like that. There is something deeper going on here in this story, though. Resplendent as it is, with blatant self-sabotage by liberals and progressives, these college Dems and the many reporters who wrote up the story using the language of victimhood and harm have clearly placed the asserted feelings of a few over actual policy change for the many. And I don't even really blame these college Dems because they're just mirroring the behavior that they see celebrated every day by mainstream Democrats and online liberals. It really reminds me, actually, of all the Elizabeth Warren supporters who decided to back Biden over Bernie because their feelings were hurt by snake emojis. They privileged their own personal emotional well-being over the project of healthcare for all. In his new book, The People Know, Thomas Frank captures this dynamic quite well, ascribing it to the liberalism that emerged in the post-civil rights New Left, writing that they invented an understanding of radicalism in which politics was no longer really about accomplishing public things for the common good. Instead, politics was becoming, at least in part, a path to personal fulfillment or healing. Protest degenerated into street theater. Radical style came to trump radical substance. As the historian Christopher Lasch put it, a satisfying sense of personal righteousness became the ultimate end of political action. So that's how you end up with the ultimate enabler of Trump, Nancy Pelosi, as some sort of yes queen hero for her style choices and mode of clapping. This is how you end up covering the vice presidential selection process as some sort of crappy celebrity reality show with glossy photo shoots and biographical branding exercise, but almost zero policy. This is how a truly remarkable nationwide protest movement gets translated through our political system into some symbolic actions on statues and kneeling in kente cloth. This is how you end up with good people getting fired for accurately citing a study with uncomfortable results. This is how you end up with viral outrage over individuals not wearing masks, but silence when Democratic Pauls like Andrew Cuomo sell out to the hospital lobby, costing actual lives. This is how you end up with viral outrage over individual racist incidents, but near silence over the nomination of a man who literally architected the system of mass incarceration which has recreated Jim Crow for the modern age. This is how you end up with ecstatic jubilation at the symbolic elevation of one woman to high office, while ignoring the way that Biden, as Elizabeth Warren once put it, sells out women to please his corporate donors. This is how you end up with obsessive moral panics about who you are and aren't allowed to associate with in order to be a good leftist, while play acting that you're really building coalitions. And this is how you end up with candidates like Shahid Buttar, Cenk Uygur, Katie Hill, and Alex Morse all being easily neutralized by allegations not of sexual violence or even harassment, but of making some other adult uncomfortable. All because we put feelings, symbols, and personal self-actualization over any actual project of political change. Now, I want to be clear here. This is not an argument for ignoring personal character and wrongdoing. Of course, actual violence and real harm is abhorrent and should be absolutely condemned. But as someone whose dumb party photos were once considered a scandal, I can tell you that not all allegations of sexual impropriety are created equally. And I can also tell you that most normal people care a lot more about whether they're going to have health care, a home, and a job than Alex Morse's dating app etiquette. Please find your self-actualization in therapy or a yoga class or through the mesmerizing rap stylings of Ben Shapiro or whatever. But politics is where grown-ups come to secure rights and decide matters of war and peace, life and death, not your battleground of personal victimhood. Sagar, we're talking to Mayor Morse later.
Yes.
We're going to press him on all of this.
That's right.
But it is outrageous to me the way that this smear campaign has come down and that progressive groups have distanced themselves. And they've used this language of sexual violence when you're talking about adding people to your close friend's Instagram story.
Well, I mean, they said, look, they put themselves on the road to this when they said the whole believe everybody, but have no scrutiny, all this other nonsense. I think it's an indictment of very much of how much the Me Too movement went forward into something that it never really should have been. And this is ultimately what happens. And I actually think that Morse and the language that he uses and so many of the other people who are like, these people deserve to be heard, all this other stuff. No, that's the truth, is that actually, if they put their allegation out there and it's BS, just call it BS.
But here's the thing.
I just think it's ridiculous.
Here's the thing. I think this goes deeper than, first of all, I do believe in the Me Too movement because I do think survivors have been too easily dismissed for too long. My problem here is that when you're talking about like someone added you on Instagram and you're conflating that with real survivors, real sexual violence, I mean, that just denigrates and diminishes the whole project. But I actually think this goes even deeper than that. This is all about people wanting to be able to virtue signal and, oh, I'm with the survivors, and be able to post a tweet that gets lots of retweets and lots of likes and be able to like wear this cloak of virtuousness and self-actualization rather than, look, you've got in Morse a progressive who is going to actually challenge power. Like, that's his whole program. Richie Neal, you know what you've got. He's one of the biggest corporate sellouts in this town.
Right.
But you never talk about that abuse of power because that would be too hard. A project of actually dealing with imperialism or corporate power, any of that, that requires real work. So let's stay over here in the realm of symbolic victories and like being able to virtue signal on Twitter. That's their land of comfort.
Well, it's about power, right? And it means you need to have a real understanding of it, which is that to them, many of these college students, whatever the university, I mean, they're products and they're very much people who will benefit from the current power structure of corporatism and of meritocracy, fake meritocracy, and of so much more. And in many ways, I've watched this movement, which I agree, I have agreed with the merits of it, especially in the beginning. But in the way that it was taken forward is used as a political weapon in order to neutralize people who would challenge that power or who would pose a threat to the establishment. And that's why I do think it's disgusting that a person like this has to, answer for his private conduct when he was like 23 or 24 years old. And Richie Neal gets to throw a party for AIG in the conference room of the committee where they bailed out that hearing, or bailed out that company. And we are the only outlet which covered that. I mean, it had one snippet in
You
playbook.
caught it in playbook.
In a playbook buried down at the bottom. And we're the only ones to say, this is outrageous. And so much of his conduct, so much of the corporatism in this town, so much of bipartisanship, and so much of resistance, and so much of what poses as, fighting even on the Republican side, against the Democrats. It's all theater in order to cover up for what the real power structure in Washington actually is. So I feel terrible for him. I completely agree. But I think we have to go deeper. And I have to say that this is a logical outgrowth for so much of what happened during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, of what happened before that, of the way the media normalized the I'm speaking out culture. So in a way, I'm like, you know what? You have to reap what you sow, which is that ultimately what happened here is that, this story was shopped around apparently, and yet then was just printed word for word, and then it gets to get picked up and be like, it was reported on by the Boston Globe while somebody prints it up. These are journalism normalization standards that happened under Me Too.
But look,
and people like us fought against it for this exact reason.
And I see this a little bit differently, because I think if you can't see the difference between actual sexual violence and like Instagram followers, and the left has turned into some sort of purity police, like we're like Pat Roberts. I mean, it's just like, what is going on here that we're the ones that are going to come in and be like, you can do that in your bedroom, but not this. If you don't understand where that line is, I don't know what you're doing. And that's part of what was so troubling about some of the progressive groups that came out and were like, well, maybe we're going to rescind our endorsement, or we're not going to activate.
The DSA unendorsed him.
Sunrise Movement, the local Massachusetts chapter, and they used, again, this language of sexual violence. And you diminish what happens to real survivors in this country that we cover quite a bit here. You diminish that experience and the pain and trauma that is when you're elevating, like, he put me on on his close friend's Instagram story to that level. Like, the hopeful part is that I think normal people would be like, this is insane.
Yeah, they do.
I think it's a very online phenomenon, and I think most of America will be like, what are you doing? This is crazy.
It does, but I do think it also proves one of my central theses, which is that I think a lot of these groups will always be beholden to these identity politics and to these types of mores. Sunrise Movement, you can talk an economic progressive game all you want. If you're going to unendorse Alex Morse because of this BS, you know what? That shows us who you really work for.
You are a group that's dedicated to, like, the existential planet-ending threat of climate change. And you're like, well, maybe he didn't do the right thing on Tinder, so forget about it.
Okay.
Crazy to me.
All right. Next on Rising, congressional candidate Alex Morse himself. He's going to join Krystal and I to talk about the allegations and his plan to stay in the race.